Before this video begins, I would like to state that any criticism made by any other person within this video is not for the intention of harassment or out of being disrespectful. It is not my intent, nor would I want it to be your intent, to attack or berate or disrespect anyone that is mentioned within this video. With that being said, on November 15th, 2024, those eagerly anticipating the announcements of this year's The Game Awards nominees were thrown into a tizzy upon a change noticed by Warrior64 and addressed by Polygon writer Maddie Myers. In her article, Game Awards confirms Elden Ring DLC, and any DLC, is Game of the Year eligible. The change in concern is based upon a new addition to the official Game Awards Q&A page, reading as follows. Are DLCs, expansion packs, and remix/remasters eligible? The Game Awards aims to recognize the best creative and technical work each year, irrespective of the format of that content's release. Expansion packs, new game seasons, DLCs, remakes, and remasters are eligible in all categories, if the jury deems the new creative and technical work to be worthy of a nomination. Factors such as the newness of the content and its price/value should be taken into consideration. In the Polygon article previously mentioned, it takes note that some may have erroneously assumed that DLCs wouldn't be in contention for these awards. In a previous version of the article, it even suggested that jurors possibly didn't know this, featuring a sentence stating, although previously the rules did not explicitly forbid video game DLCs and expansions from nomination. Most voters, Polygon staff included, had assumed that DLCs wouldn't be in contention for these awards. While I can't highlight on screen the section of the article that did say this, even though it was in the first paragraph, I can refer to my quoting of the article in a conversation within the Source Gaming Discord server, said screenshot now on screen for your viewing. Additionally, the current version of the article does highlight the change, notifying readers that the Game Awards committee did notify voters prior to the nominations. This reads as follows. Correction. A previous version of the story incorrectly suggested that voters for the Game Awards might not have been aware of this rule. According to a source at the Game Awards, voters were informed prior to submitting their ballots. However, I think the existence of this article is still based upon the idea that most people, and potentially even the voters before they were going to vote, assumed that DLC, expansions, and remakes/remasters were not eligible for voting, which is incredibly strange to me. Those that have tuned into our streams know that I'm often part of our Game Awards live streams, our 2023 live stream being done by my lonesome, and that will once again be the case this year. Maybe. So are we not all watching the same show? Before moving into examples of previous nominations, I want to address the concern that is the most confusing. As stated in the Polygon article and a few videos that I've watched discussing this new addition to the Q&A, each one does accurately address that this question was surprisingly added. The confusion that arises for me is that this new questions and its concerns were already addressed in a previous question 2 rows above. Now, make no mistake, I can very clearly see that the question itself specifically mentions live service games, of which Elden Ring is not. However, the answer it provides states that games released in previous years are eligible in all award categories, so long as the jury feels their inclusion is merited to new content improvements or service updates. In addition, the Best Ongoing Game category specifically recognizes titles that continue to provide value to customers, and such has been the case given certain nominees that we will get into. The only difference between this question, well, there are actually 2 substantial differences. The first one is that it makes zero mention of remakes or remasters. The second difference is that the page visually looks different, and that's for good reason. It isn't because it's not available on the same Q&A page on the website. It looks different because I'm showing you a question that has been part of the Game Awards Q&A page since at least 2021. This has been the way the Game Awards have been, not just in writing, but also in action. The lack of checking the other questions for this type of detail is where I think Maddie Myers' Polygon article is at fault. It leaves this new question as one to be taken with genuine surprise rather than taking the opportunity to inform readers who may have somehow not realized it over the years that there is already a precedent set. And speaking of precedents, let's get into the examples. Now, I'm only going to go as far back as 2019, which is still 2 years prior to how far the Wayback Machine allows me to check the Game Awards Q&A page. Starting off in 2019, Beat Saber was nominated for Best VR/AR Game, although it originally released in early access in May of 2018. As a quick addition, early access games are eligible as any games of public consumption are available. So, if the jurors really wanted to, for instance, they could have nominated Deltarune Chapter 1 back when it came out. Resident Evil 2, the remake, was nominated for Best Action Adventure and Game of the Year. Shadowbringers Final Fantasy XIV Online, 14's third expansion, was nominated, and Monster Hunter World Iceborne was nominated as well for Best RPG. In the year of 2020, Mortal Kombat 11 Ultimate and Street Fighter V Champion Edition were both nominated for Best Fighting Game, when clearly these are expanded versions of their best games that were already nominated previously. Mortal Kombat 11 was nominated for Best Fighting Game in 2019. And if you wanted to, I personally would, Under Night In-Birth EXE Late Clear also falls into the same situation of being an expansion. Hades, who was also an early access game in 2018, but completed its content and development in 2020, was nominated for Best Action, Best Indie, Best Performance, Best Score and Music, Best Art Direction, Best Narrative, Best Game Direction, and also for Game of the Year. In 2021, Nier Replicant version 1.22474487139, a new version of Nier Gestalt/Replicant, was nominated for Best Score and Music. In 2022, Live Alive was nominated for Best RPG. However, despite being a remake, people may view this title in a special situation as it never released internationally prior to this instance. However, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R, a remaster that consistently gets new content through season passes, was nominated for Best Fighting Game. And in 2023, Resident Evil 4, the remake, was nominated for Best Audio Design, Best Action Adventure, and for Game of the Year. Additionally, Cyberpunk 2077's Phantom Liberty DLC expansion saw nominations in Best Performance and Best Narrative. Given the evidence that we have at hand, I think suggesting that the rules are being changed as to push From Software's Shadow of the Erdtree expansion for the Elden Ring is an argument that rings hollow.
Now, first of all, I absolutely love Elden Ring. It's my favorite game of all time now. I loved Shadow of the Erdtree. I thought it was phenomenal. They're clearly changing the rules in order to be able to nominate Shadow of the Erdtree, and I'm sure Shadow of the Erdtree is going to sweep this year.
The most common sentiment I've seen is one of feeling, considering that the original base game was not within this year's release window. Another argument that I saw coming from Spawn Wave Media was this.
Well, if you look at the top-rated games this year, look, I know it's not always go by Metacritic. Those are your nominees. I understand that. It's hard not to look at the top-rated thing here and be like, oh, that is Shadow of the Erdtree. That's an expansion. Relies on Elden Ring, by the way, and if you play it, it's very good. It's more Elden Ring, though. Elden Ring already won Game of the Year, so more Elden Ring, in theory, should also be able to win Game of the Year. Okay, that checks out, but it's like, okay, an expansion that relies on another game to just start up and function, it just, I don't know, for some reason that doesn't necessarily compute in my mind compared to, look.
Well, to start off easy, in the case of a remake like Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 2, or in this year's big remakes, Persona 3 Reload and Silent Hill 2, if these were just the same games, well then, what was ever the point in remaking them? The sentiment that I personally have towards remakes are that they are not necessary to exist, but I think it is egregious if the original version is not easily made available to also experience, as it is a part of the medium and the history. Despite how I feel in that regard, the reality is that remakes are oftentimes not the same game. They may not go as far as Final Fantasy VII Remake does, but the work that hundreds of thousands of people put into the music, art style, animations, newly implemented gameplay elements, debugging, basically everything is still a lot of newly done work by likely not the exact same people from decades ago. Everything about a remake's existence inherently seeks to differentiate itself from a game that it is based upon, despite sharing the name. Otherwise, the smarter and always more financially safe move would have been to just simply port the original game, rather than spending hundreds of millions of dollars into newer versions that could potentially sell poorly or not perform as critically well. In the case of remasters, the same idea applies, but I think at a vastly different level. For remasters, we understand that the game is primarily intended to be the same, but with additional content and improved work in visuals and sound. In recent years, we've seen this occur with Nier Replicant's new version and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure All-Star Battle R receiving nominations for score and fighting game respectively. Otherwise, it hasn't been to the same scale as a remake has. But onto the biggest two that have received the most discussion within this conversation: DLC and expansions. Although the base games may not have released within that year, the new DLC and expansion that is in question oftentimes didn't release within the year of the base game's consideration. Thus, the game isn't being praised for having already existed, it's being praised for the new work that the developers did, if the jurors believe that new work to be substantial enough. I don't think an expansion's basis for relying on a previously existing title should discredit it. Otherwise, I believe I have to argue that a sequel's reliance on a previous title also makes it not as worthy of praise. If anything, so many beloved sequels receive praise because of how they managed to improve upon and deliver heightened experiences from its predecessor. With a game expansion not being the same as its basis, with newly implemented hard work that more people pour into a project, why should we discredit it as simply being the same as its basis? Yes, the file size of Elden Ring did get bigger, but that doesn't mean it was for nothing. I can agree that the Game Awards doesn't present enough representation to indie titles or just in general other titles that would definitely be deserving of nominations in my eyes. However, if it's the case that Shadow of the Erdtree is nominated for Game of the Year or even any category for that matter, that just goes to show how successful it was in providing a large number of people an unforgettable experience that rivals brand new titles. Ahead of its expansion's launch, Elden Ring sold 25 million copies. That is 25 million people and counting to be impacted by Shadow of the Erdtree. That's 25 million plus people that also are having their time, attention, and money competed for against other titles like Stellar Blade, Black Myth Wukong, Echoes of Wisdom, Metaphor ReFantazio, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, Natsumon, Zelda Zone Zero, and many, many more. If those new titles fail to grab the attention or deliver experiences that are favorable to a new expansion of a beloved game, that's on the fault of those titles, not the ones that were able to do it. By the time you're watching this video, the nominations for this year's Game Awards were already announced. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but despite what does, I still want to hear what you think down in the comments below. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree, I want to know why even more. Thank you for watching. If you're moved over to Blue Sky, be sure to follow us over there. And always remember to return to the source.